Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rav Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rav Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, and Abiel HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, Le'erich Yomim V'Sharim Tevis for many long, healthy years. We concluded Perek Yud Ches, chapter 18 in Tanya, but I want to go over it a little more in depth, a little more in detail, especially the end of the Perek, and also an overview of the whole order of Tanya from the beginning till where we are here now. So the Perek Yud Ches begins a whole new section that's talking about the dormant love, the Ava Mesuteres, that is inherent and innate in each neshama, each Jewish soul. And it's inherent in there from Yerushim Aviseinu. It means literally we inherit it just like our genes, our DNA, from our ancestors, namely are the Ovis, the patriarchs. And this was in contrast, if you wish, to the Ava that he's been talking about until chapter 18, the Ava that we generate through our Avodah, through contemplation. Because when you think about it, let's just put it into context. When the Alter Rebbe began Tanya, after the questions at the beginning of chapter 1, and then he went the second half of chapter 1 and said there's two nefashos. Every person has two souls, an animal soul, nefesh habamis, and a divine soul, a nefesh halikis in chapter 2 and on. Chapters 2, 3, 4, 5 was about the divine soul. 6, 7, and 8 was about the animal soul. Chapter 9 was about the confrontation, the clash between them, the battle. And then 10 was when the Nefesh HaLekis completely dominates the tzaddik. 11 is when there's the battle raging, sometimes the divine soul, sometimes the animal soul. That's the Rasha, and the different levels in that. And then from chapter 12 through chapter 17 was all about the Beinani, which is what is expected from all of us, Midas Kol Adam v'Acharei Kol Adam Yimshech, that all of us have the capacity to be a Beinani, because a Beinani has an animal soul, but it's kept under control, that it doesn't affect the thought, speech, and action of the person. And that's the main focus of Sefer Shel Beinani. But all that, if you think in chapter 2, after chapter 2 where he explains the divine soul, the next chapter you could say, why didn't he go to chapter 18? After explaining what the divine soul is, he should start talking about, okay, this divine soul, which comes from Chachma, or Hu v'Chachma se'echad, like he explained in chapter 2. Chelik alekam mal mam is like his child that comes from the very matter of his father's mind. Moyacha'av. So now he should say, and as a result of that Chachma, he has Ava Mesuteres, like he explained in chapter 18. That it comes from Chachma. And that Chachma we inherit from our ancestors, from the Ovis. Yerushalayim Aviseinu, and that causes the Ava Mesuteres to the point that no Jew is ever disconnected, and every Jew, even a Kalsha B'Kalim, even if he doesn't have an understanding, and even if he's not totally committed, cannot be torn away, will go on Mesiras Nefesh and die for his Amunah, Al Pi Reiv, which we'll discuss soon. So that should have been in chapter 3, after Chelik Elikam Mamash. It seems to flow right from there. No, the Alter Rebbe goes first to explain the faculties of the divine soul. Okay, the faculties we understand, and the garments of the divine soul. But he goes to explain not the natural love that we have, he talks about the love that we generate through contemplation. So after explaining, so you could say after chapter 2, he should have said briefly, there's faculties of the divine soul, Chachma Bina Das, all the way through Malchus, all the 10 faculties of the divine soul. Then come the 3 garments of the divine soul, thought, speech, and action. And then say, inherent to this divine soul is this Ava. Or the other way around, start with the Ava Mesuteres and then go to the faculties and the garments. But that's not what the Alter Rebbe does. he speaks about the faculties, and right away says, and these faculties are there for us to contemplate on Gadlus Hashem. Like he says, I'm a Malak Kalam, and Sev of Kalam, and Kula Kamei Kalo Chashiv. How God manifests and encompasses and is within all of existence. How God is beyond existence, Sev of Kalam, and Kulu Kamei Kalo Chashiv. How everything is nullified before Him, Kula Kamei Kalo Chashiv. And that awakens and generates and stimulates and gives birth through das. That's the iskashus or chachma bina, where we have a connection, a concentration, the das that allows for the abba v'ima of chachma bina to join and give birth to what? To midas, to ava v'yira, to love and reverence of God. And then he goes on the aveda of the levushim, that this comes to the levushim of Torah mitzvahs, of machshav, thought, speech, and action. Talks about Torah and mitzvahs. Then he goes to the animal soul. And it's only after chapter 17, chapter 18, where he says, where he began the chapter where he spoke about that now we're going to understand better, and he goes deeper into the whole subject by saying, by understanding that everybody has an Ava Musateres. And where does that come from? From the natural, from Chochmeh ben Nefesh Adam, which is a keli, a channel for Ein Sof Mamish, and that's why even a Kal Shebakalim goes on Mesidus Nefesh, like he says. I feel a Kal Shebakalim Peshes Som Meishim Nafshim Al Kedushas Hashem Al Arev. Or like he said earlier, we spoke about. He said since everyone, he says Ein Sof Baruch Hu Malub B'Chinas Chochesh Benefesh Adam Yiyeh Mishiyeh Mi Yisrael. And that extends to the whole nefesh from Spashetis. And that's why every person, feel the Kal Shebekalim, Peish Yisrael, Nimshach, at least the nefesh, the Malchus, the Asiyah. Because within it you have the 10 spheres and all the way to Chochmah, all the way back to Chochmah, to Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So what do you learn from this? The fact that the Alter Rebbe placed this here and begins with Aveda, because the Sefer Shel Beinanim, number one, is about the Beinani. And the Beinani is about your Aveda, Avedas HaBeinani. Remember in chapter 15, it was all about the Aveda of the Beinani, not Lo Yavodeh. Even a Beinani can also have it naturally. It's his first nature, it's his second nature. But the key is Avodeh. There should be work. We're sent to this world to work, not just to be here and say, oh, I'm a child of God's and I have a natural love inside me. So that's number one. Sefer Shel Beinim is the focus on becoming a Beinani and that work that's necessary. And where's the work most manifest? When you see the contemplation and then the birth of Midas, of Ava V'yira. But at the same time, we have an additional resource and asset, and that's what he begins to talk about in chapter 18. And that is the Ava Musateres. He mentions it in the previous chapters, as we've discussed. Because it's an additional asset. But that, if he would begin with that, it would be like saying, okay, now that you have a Chelik Elikah Mamash, you have Ava Musateres. Not that people would go to sleep and say that's enough, but the focus, the primary focus is the Avedas HaBeinani. And that's why it's called Sefer Shel Beinim. The work that you have Meir Shalat Alev and all the other elements of self-control and self-discipline and self-mastery, and it should become internalized through Aveda. But at the same time, know as well that part of and that's why it's Karev Elecha Adover Me'ed, because all that is accessible and reachable to us, because we all have Meir Shalat Alev and these resources. But in addition to that, to explain it further, Tesvus Bir, like he says in the beginning of chapter 18, and also to explain the word Mo'ed, that it's very much accessible. And to everybody, he adds now that everyone, even a Kal Shebakalim, even someone that can't contemplate and cannot use their faculties, because that's how he begins. In other words, all that we discussed earlier from chapter 3 and on, if he does not have that capacity to give birth to love and reverence, Afal Pikein, he has B'Yerusha Ma'aviseinu, he has the Ava Musateres. Here too you need Aveda, as he explained in chapter 15 and 16. You also have Aveda to draw and the fact that Ava Mesuteres should emerge. The real Aveda is giving birth to love and reverence through your efforts. But even Ava Mesuteres shouldn't just be rely on that it's there dormant inside you. You also want to bring it alive. And then you have the strength of all, the Aveda, plus that which is dormant and inherent within us, which I believe I explained in the previous year, is essentially in psychological terms, it's a combination of behavioral psychology and internal psychology, meaning the behavioral is to do whatever you can behaviorally through Aveda to behave properly. But then you also have an inherent force called Ava Mesuteres that you're born with. So it's not just through nurture and Aveda, it's also through nature. But he starts with the nurture, which means the Aveda, and then he moves to the nature. And together it creates a formidable combination to live a life, a divine life. And of course, the Ava Mesuteres, on the other hand, has certain qualities that the Ava that comes from his bonus doesn't have. His bonus, the Ava that comes from his bonus is more internal, but it's also not as consistent in a way. It's dependent on your contemplation and your Aveda. And that's why it fluctuates. The Ava Mesuteres is always there. On the other hand, the Aveda makes it internal and integrated. So when you can bring both of them, the steadiness, like he says, Tomid, at the end of Perek Yud Ches, the expression of the Alter Rebbe is when he says, let me just get the exact lashon. V'ani tomid imoch, kolem shebezeh ani bar ubehemes, ani tomid imoch, tomid. That means it's a consistency. Even when you're asleep, you have Ava Mesuteres. So each one has a quality that the other doesn't have. Like we see, people who have, let's take an example, Havdil, secular example. Someone is born with musical talent. Great, genius musical talent. It's a dormant element in them. And for all we know, it could remain locked forever. No one notices it. But then someone recognizes it's there. Parents, an educator, educators. And then they start teaching lessons to this child, to this prodigy, training. And suddenly you see it come alive. Now, had he only had the training and he didn't have that prodigious element, the genius element of musical talent, he may become a musician, but he has a combination of both. Then you have people who may not have naturally and inherent in them that talent, but they still can work on it. Sometimes working on it actually can achieve a lot more than those that don't. That's where you find people with very good minds, but if they haven't exerted themselves, they sometimes have a certain laziness, a certain superficiality. Whereas somebody who's worked hard is very internal. That effort, the yigiyah, the diligence. If you have both, then you have best of both worlds. So essentially, the Alter Rebbe first begins with the work part, the training, the conditioning, the work on it, and then talks about the dormant love, the Ava Mesuteres. Both come together, as I said, as a formidable combination. So you see, even the order is so critical in understanding Tanya, and how the Avedas HaBeinanim is so vital as well in this topic. And the taste of his beer comes the explanation. In addition, that Ma'oid, Korev Elecha Dover Ma'oid, as Chassidim interpret, Ma'oid also connected, that's not just Ava, it's Ava B'chol Ma'odecha, Ma'oid. Okay. So what does the Alter Rebbe say at the end that we'll just go over the end of the Perek itself? So the end of the Perek was, remember the Alter Rebbe pointed out 4 points. You could say 4, he doesn't put it as questions, but 4 things he said, Lahavin. Let's go back just to the beginning because it's very relevant to the whole flow here. Where he says like this. The 4 things, when he speaks about Ava Mesuteres, that everyone has Yerusha Ma'avesenu, L'had Ma'avesenu, Tzarech Levayro Lahagdim Tchila. So he does say, to explain and to preface, Bayit Heitiv, well, Sheirish Avazu, the root of this Ava, and that the Alter Rebbe explained. The root of this Ava is from the Ovis. Actually, let me correct myself. No, The love is rooted in the chokhmah, in the nefesh. That's the root of the ava. Then he said v'inyana. V'inyana means is defining property. That he did not explain. He's going to explain that in chapter 19, next chapter. Then the next thing is v'echi Yerushalanu. How is it a Yerusha for us? And that he did explain here. That it's the roots from the Ovis because of their utter dedication, because they were the Markova. And then the fourth thing that he says, how does it include also reverence of God, not just love? So bottom line is that 1 and 3, point 1 and 3, he discussed. Point 2 and 4, he did not. So he explained the Shadish coming from Chochmeh. The Yerusha is coming from the Ovis through to their Bittul. But in explaining it, after saying that it comes from the Ovis through to their Bittul, he goes on to explain the process, how it actually becomes part of us. That embedded within each through his soul is a Chochmeh, which carries within it Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Why? Because Chochmeh is not just intelligence. Chochmeh has koyach ma, has a measure of experiencing something greater than itself. In other words, God could have created creation, each neshama, in a way just like he created a stone or a tree or an animal. That they're created by God. They may even be aware of God. But they don't have that experience of something completely beyond them, which would lead to an ava mesuteres, that love and that bittul and that mesiras nefesh. You don't have the concept. It's not even expected from Daimim Sameach Chai. They should have mesiras nefesh for Hashem. They should lose themselves in that process. Awareness, yeah. Every animal has awareness. On the contrary, they don't have free will. They never, le'meshana tafkidim, like we learn later in Tanya. They never waver from God's will either. But neshama has beyond that, has something, an experience of the divine beyond existence. And that why? Because that divine beyond existence is embedded in his chokhmah through the Ovis and their work that became a Yerusha. Like he explained, when he explained this whole idea, he said, and just to read inside, let's read inside the language. He says, that's the Ovis that were mamshech and naran to b'neihem from the 10 spheres into each world, each person, kifi madrigosei, kifi maisov. So even in the lowest levels of souls, it's in there. Because even in Malchus of Asiya has within it Malchus, Chochmah of Malchus of Asiya, Chochmah d'Asiya, which has in it Chochmah de Malchus of Atzilus, which has within it Chochmah of Atzilus, which has within it Ein Sof Baruch Hu Mamish, which is beyond existence. So Chochmah becomes the interface between the beyond and existence. Because on one hand, Chochmah is something higher than Havana Vasog, it's the root of it all, but it also manifests as the beginning, it's the first spark in the beginning process of an intellectual process, which is the beginning of our conscious faculties. Like he continues to say, which manifests the entire person, and then he explains, because Chochmah is Mokar HaSeichel V'Havana Hi L'mayla Mahabina. It's higher than understanding and comprehension. And it's the Mokar. And that's why it says Chochmah Kayachma Masha'ena Musaga Movin, and not Nitfas Basaga Adaya. That's the divine. It's something beyond our comprehension, beyond our grasp. So we're experiencing something from a higher place. That's the gift that was given to us. That's the Yerushalanu Ma'avesenu given to us. And that's why in the Slabish by Ein Sof Baruch Hu, less machshavet tfisa meklal. How could Ein Sof be mislabish in the Chochmah if Chochmah was a defined faculty of consciousness, of pure conscious intelligence, like Bina? When less machshavet tfisa meklal, because Chochmah is not purely intellect. And that's when he says, L'chein kol Yisrael, afil ha'noshim v'amei ha'oretz, are my meaning, they have this amunah in them, because amunah is higher than seichel. L'mayla min hadas v'asogeh, pesiyam l'chol dover. And l'gaba kodesh baruch hu, that's l'mayla m'seichel, everyone is called kipsei. as he continues to say. Yeah. And that's why even a Kal Shebekal Mempeshi Yisrael, like we learned, is Meisim Nafsham Akdushas Hashem. Meisim Nefesh Akdushas Hashem. Why would I give up my life for something greater than myself? Only because I have that greater part within me. And they're savely minuim koshim, in order lo lichbe b'Hashem echad. And we're talking about even if they're burim v'ameyoretz, and they don't know anything about Gedulas Hashem, ein yedim Gedulas Hashem, the greatness of God. Like we learned earlier, we're not talking about people who can contemplate on that. And even the ma'at sheyedim, they don't contemplate on it, and they're not meisa nefesh mitzad hadas v'izbonnus b'Hashem klal. A person who contemplates and says, it's worth giving my life because I'm giving my life for something greater than me. Here we're talking about something coming natural without any contemplation. So that makes this question even stronger. With seichel, you could say seichel is mechayev; it compels you to give your life. But here it's machmas das emes nash machmas das v'izbonnus b'Hashem klal. Aval bli shum das v'izbonnus la ki'ilu hu dover she'yeh efshar klal. Without any contemplation and without any concentration, they give up, are ready to give up, and are not capable. He cannot bring himself. It's impossible to denounce the one God. How is that possible? Because he has with him because that Hashem Echad, that divine union, the oneness of God, Hashem Echad, is not removed. It's part of him. It's part of our DNA. It's very much part of the inherent part of the person. And it's Meir Mechaya Kol HaNefesh. And not only is it part of it, Meir irradiates, and Mechaya and energizes, vitalizes Kol HaNefesh, like we said before, Mispashit Kol HaNefesh, from that Chochmah. That Chochmah becomes the channel for that Eirei Ein Sof that's higher than existence, within existence. And that's what ultimately what a neshama is. So it does come together with chapter 2 in Tanya. Chapter 2, he said, we come from a higher place, a child of God's, a part of God's mind, so to speak, an extension of God's mind. But then he went on to speak the Avodah, like we said before, the work to access that. Now he's talking about that inherent aspect of us is embedded within us. That every neshama is essentially an interface between beyond existence and existence. That's a neshama. You think about it. Alter Rebbe laying out, what is your soul? Someone say, what's a soul? A soul is a bridge, an interface between the transcendent and the immanent, between that which is beyond us and with that and us, between beyond existence and existence. And that's why we are sent to this world. Because we have the power to bring that higher level into existence and elevate existence in that fashion. And that's what a human being can do. But let's talk about a few words about the fact that he said the words that means the majority. That means there is an exception. Because you see, the fact is, you see people, God forbid, who even when under threat, they're not Moshe Nefesh. There are people, God forbid, who even so-called shmad themselves. So the Alter Rebbe says alarei, but the question is how? If every neshama has this, so briefly, 2 points. One is that when even if they so-called do not give their lives, it's not because they don't want to. The neshama always wants to. Whatever reason, something has, like it says in the Rambam writes, the end of chapter 2 in Hilchos Gerushin, Yitzrei Hushe Onsei. Every Jew wants to do Torah mitzvahs. It talks there about Keifenei say, to compel someone to give a get. A get can't be a get musa, you can't force someone to give a get. Says the Rambam, you could. You know why? Because the Yetzer Hara is forcing him. He really wants to do what the Eibishter wants. Every Jew wants to be Mekayim mitzvahs and not do Averos. Wants to be connected to Hashem. It's halacha in Rambam. But the Yetzer has now compelled him, has taken him captive. So by compelling him, you're getting rid of the Yetzer Hara. The enemy is holding him captive. But that's what he really wants. So you have that concept. Meaning everybody has free will. So the 2 points are, number one, is even when he's doing it, it's not really what he wants. He's only doing it an external thing. Whatever, he wants to be comfortable. Even there, it's only a miyut. Reiv will give their lives even when they don't necessarily have any appreciation of God. They just naturally will do so. You don't find that anywhere else. If you find Mesilas Nefesh by other nations and others, it's because it makes sense to them. Or because they're so devoted. You're not going to find someone who considers himself an atheist or an unbeliever in a different religion that's going to give his life for his faith. Doesn't believe in it. Here you'll find it by Jews because of the neshama has this inherent al pi reiv. The miyut, because at the end of the day you have free will. And even when you're doing it, it's not being done with a full heart. It's not because you really don't believe in God. It's just whatever the reason is. There are reasons. It could be the as I said, Yitzvei Shonsei, or other factors that are blinding the person. He's not aware, he's ignorant on that level. But even there, the neshama remains Hashem, the child of the gods, and connected. However, it didn't manifest because, as I said, free will or the other factors that we just discussed. Okay, so we come away with is an unbelievable understanding now. In addition to the inherent, and in addition to everything we learned, the power we have in our Aveda, which itself is also tremendous. Imagine, just hypothetically, God forbid, let's say we didn't have this Ava Mesuteres. He still spoke about how much power we have to control ourselves. And that's also inherent. But now that you have also this dormant, inherent love that comes from Avesenu, from our patriarchs, you think about the Gewalt of a neshama. You look at another Jew, you look at yourself. This is who you are. This is who you be'etzem are. The Alter Rebbe has laid out bare the anatomy of a soul. In chapter 18, and we'll be continuing now in chapter 19, how do you access that part of you? Is bringing out that inherent part after we learn that length about the Aveda part. And with that, we'll stop here. Everyone, a gute Woche, and a kosher and freilich and Pesach. We'll continue this journey next week, every week, Mitzvah Shabbos at 10 o'clock New York time. And a gute Woche, and be well, and may the Eden and Eretz Yisrael be completely protected, and enter the war, complete freedom, unharmed of all the hostages. Be well, and again, a kosher and freilich and Pesach.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.